Hello team, this is Real World Audio, and today I'm going to show you another loudspeaker. John Sveda brought to my attention the Spendor A4 as a loudspeaker that has a good bass response, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Spendor. And unfortunately I didn't find measurements on it, so I'm going to go deeper into its bigger brother, the A7, because Stereophile did a review and a measuring session on that, so I'm going to interpret that. But before we go into any further, I really don't want my channel to turn into a Let's Analyze Loudspeakers channel. So I don't want to do too many of these speaker reviews, and I don't want to do this for every single loudspeaker in the universe. I'm just showing a few examples, and I'm teaching you how to read these charts, how to read the measurements, how to interpret what you see, and by hearing a few of my interpretations on the construction of these loudspeakers, I really hope to teach this skill to you, how to read the measurements and how to gauge a loudspeaker based on what they report about its measurements. So here we go. Let's see, that's the drivers of this loudspeaker, and I wanted to see the port, and I would say it has a nice big port at the towards the bottom of this floor standard loudspeaker. It has nice binding post, and let's see how it looks like. So this is how it looks like, a slim floor standard model. Now let's look at Stereophile. This is the A7, which looks very similar from the front. And if we look at the back, I think we won't see any pictures on the back in this page 1. So we will go into that a little bit later on. However, this bigger version is very, very similar to the smaller A4. And we see the same two-way construction, same slim front floor standard design. And we have Art Dudley's story about it, pretty funny. You can read about it if you want to. And then it talks introduced in February 2018, so it's a British company. And now let's look at the drivers. So when we look at the woofer, it is quite similar to the drivers that Ryan Acoustics uses. It reminds me of the Ryan drivers. It's like a modern cone material, and excuse me. And we can expect precise sound from it. And from the tweeter, I cannot tell much because there's that metallic dome that you see, that metallic grill that protects it. But now that I have zoomed into the image, underneath that honeycomb metal grill, the function of that is actually to protect from prying fingers. So if you have children, they won't be able to poke the dome. But I see that there's a really big surrounding the dome, and that would really give this tweeter a very directional response. And when we look in the text, that's what the text says, that this tweeter is very directional, and it doesn't have a wide dispersion, it has a narrow dispersion. So it means that it literally just beams the sound in front, and that's because that big surround in the edge, that big bulb you see, that's what's holding the dome in its place in the front. It gives it a horn effect. So there's a small horn effect that's governed by that surround, and then the dome. So when you look at the dome profile and the cone surround profile, they form a little horn. You see? So basically, this is a tweeter that employs the horn effect, and that horn effect gives it directivity. And we could actually calculate the directivity if we saw how it looks like. So basically for the horns, when you have here's the mouth of the horn, I mean the throat of the horn down here, and up here there's the mouth. And at the bottom piece, the angle of the throat, that determines the dispersion that your horn will have. So even though if it's like a very narrow throat, but in the end it really widens out, even though it widened out, but it will stay very much directive. And here we see that groove between the dome and the surround is pretty deep, so that will give it quite a bit of directivity. So when you see a tweeter like that, then that tweeter will play in a very directional manner. It means you have to face your loudspeaker towards you. If it's towed, if it's not towed in, so if it's not, the two speakers are not pointing towards your ears, but they're pointing straight in front, then you will miss a lot of the high frequency energy. And that's what R. Dudley also noticed, and he describes that when he towed the speakers in, so basically pointing the tweeters at his ears or shoulders, that's when he had the best high frequency response. And that coincides with what we see in the driver structure. Now, blah, blah, blah. Let's just scroll down. And just looking at the loudspeaker, it looks really nice. But we have to add that what you see is not what you get. This is really a nice touch that companies are adding veneers to the MDF, but it does not turn that loudspeaker into wood. So what you see in the front is just a plastic protective layer. The speaker cabinet is not made from that wood. It's made from medium density fiberboard. And I really, really, really hate MDF as a material to use for loudspeaker material. Companies still use it because of consistency. So yes, we cannot beat MDF for consistency. And if you are a loudspeaker manufacturer company, then if you want to keep production costs normal, so you want to be able to manufacture speakers to actually sell them, then you are kind of left with no choice but to use MDF, because MDF, as it's made through an artificial process, it is made to a very high consistency. So basically, that's why companies use MDF, because it's extremely consistent. So when you design your loudspeaker and you want to make, let's say, 10,000 units or 10,000 pairs, then if you make them from MDF, then all the cabinets will sound the same if they are cut the same size and put together the same way. If you are using live wood, if it was like a true wood instead of just a veneer on MDF, each cabinet would sound different, and you would need to optimize your crossover for each pair separately. Of course, you would get a much more natural sound of it, but the cost would be prohibitive, because then the company would need to inspect each pair separately, and then you would have bespoke cabinets instead of mass manufactured cabinets. And of course, when we are talking about bespoke units, be it your shoes, like dance shoes, or golf clubs, or fishing rods, whatever, the prices are astronomically higher, because the person who's behind it, they have to do basically the engineering and testing process separately for each unit, instead of doing it once for a 10,000 pair production run. And I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice here. And the setup, da la 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 la. You can read if you want to. Let's go to page number 2. Oh, I'm just going very fast over there. And he is talking about mentioning Police's Ghost in the Machine. And I can second that Ghost in the Machine, their Sting plays a really mean bass guitar. So if you are a bass guitar fan and you want to test what your loudspeakers can do for you, for bass guitars and in the bass department, then Ghost in the Machine is just a fantastic album. I love it. It's phenomenal. And as R. Dudley says, it is huge. So he says, Sting's rich E-bass, electronic bass, has never sounded so weighty and whole. And it really, if you have a good system, then Sting's bass on Ghost in the Machine is just otherworldly. It's fantastic, and really the whole Ghost in the Machine it has a huge image. You are not getting tiny Muppets screaming at you. It's a really lush, big experience, like you are at a Sting concert, at a Police concert. It's absolutely phenomenal, and in this test he's using a HANA cartridge. One of my favorite, like a budget cartridge for Ghost in the Machine and bass in general, is another Japanese cartridge, the Audio-Technica ATF7. It is, I think, their cheapest MC moving coil cartridge. But if you have the right phono stage with it, unfortunately, that's the Achilles heel of budget MC cartridges, is that people try to pair it with budget step-ups and budget phono stages, and then it will just sound squeaky and you know, like the musical mice in Monty Python singing, like that type of thing. That's what you get. But if you have a good quality phono stage with a good MC step up in it, then this cartridge will just sound absolutely gorgeous on Sting's double bass. And if I were a double bass player, I would just die for that, literally. Not literally. I would not. Then I wouldn't be a double bass player anymore. Okay. So anyway, I really second Art's choice on Sting. I mean, Police's Ghost in the Machine. It's a really phenomenal LP to test what your loudspeaker can do in the bass department. So I don't really want to draw this any further, but we'll show you why the bass sounds so good on this loudspeaker. And part of it was that driver, which has a nice controlled sound, and it will work very well with all sorts of amplification to produce bass. But here is the key to the bass of this loudspeaker. You see the slot port. When you look back to my videos from about a year ago, from the very, very start, this is what I've been telling you guys, that if you want excellent bass, you have to go with a slot port. Forget those round poopers, farters. They are a really severe compromise. And here R. Dudley is talking about this, that because this is a wider port, and you see, if it's a round port, it means it has a single resonant frequency which is dominant by that diameter of the port. And here we have two very different lengths. So this pertains to a frequency, that pertains to a frequency, and the length of the port pertains to a third frequency, which they amplify the most. So because it's not a single frequency but broken up to two very different resonance modes, then we do not have a single dominant port resonance coming out. And that's why these slot ports work much better. And you see, they rounded down the lips to minimize the edge diffraction. They could have rounded down these sides as well, for an even better response, but if you are mass producing loudspeaker, then it would add another additional step to just router the corners down. And also, if you wanted to go even further, you should a little bit make the sides not flat, but a little bit hollow, so that there's a curve on the slide, so the frequency waves are not bouncing back and forth. That would decrease the port resonance even more. And now let's see, blah blah blah. It's talking about a Hungarian integrated amp. Look at that. Let me just let in the cat. So I never heard of this brand, even though I'm from Hungary. I'm Hungarian, but I can tell, and it says that it's not as good as the other amp. But if you want a darn good Hungarian amp, then I can recommend DPA. It's Danish Peter Audio. Danish Peter, he is the Hungarian Kondosan. Basically, he builds amps which are that caliber, like Audionaut, and he builds I think he only builds tube amps. I think so. He's a master transformer winder. He wound for me my autoformers for my volume control, for my AVC unit, and he is one of the best transformer makers for audio in the world. And I heard his 300B amp, single-handed amp, with the loudspeaker that I designed for my friend in Hungary, and he built it with spruce, using spruce for the loudspeaker cabinet. It was a 2-meter tall loudspeaker cabinet made entirely from spruce, and that was one of the most natural sounding combos ever. And Danish Peter's DPA's credit is well deserved. Also, that speaker that I designed, it didn't have a round port. It was a void pipe, which looks like it has a slot port, although it's not technically a port, but behaves in a similar fashion. So let's just go back to our loudspeaker here, and let's just scroll down to the measurements page, because I'm now, already at 17 minutes. The time just really flies. So let's just go very quickly at it. And it's specified as an 8-ohm driver, and indeed it's an 8-ohm driver. It doesn't dip below 6 ohms, and it dips around 170 hertz or so. And basically, when you look at the impedance phase, it's pretty benign, except here around 70 hertz there's a dip to below 50 degrees, and we are pushing 45 degrees around, what's that, like 60 hertz. And that also coincides with the resonant mode of the driver, of the woofer. I would say it might have some softening in those frequency ranges. Other than that, you see this is the crossover region. And it's happening. So you see where that blip in the phase response is, in the impedance phase, which is not the acoustic phase, it's the impedance, how the amplifier sees your loudspeaker. It's around 3.7 kilohertz, and that's where the crossover frequency is specified by the manufacturer. And they did a good job, because the graph says that it's really at 3.7 kilohertz, because you see that's where the phase behavior changes as the two drivers meet there. So there's the falling off for the woofer, and then the tweeter is picking up its job, and one character gives way to another character, and we see that huge upping in the impedance, partially because the crossover makes the impedance higher and higher. This is the low pass crossover, and here we see the high pass crossover on the other side of that slope. And there we see that the port is tuned to about 39 hertz, That's what we see on there. That's where the valley is. You see it down there, 10, 20, 30, 40 hertz, and the dip is just before 40 hertz, so about 39 hertz. And actually that's what they specify, that the port tuning is 39 hertz. And the bottom of the response is specified as 32 hertz. And let's see, 20, 30, so about 32 hertz, that's where we start to leave the valley. So this valley is where the port works. It has its output maximum, and you see we are going impedance above 12 ohm and higher. So this is where the port already starts to shut down. So that is correct as well. So we are seeing, I'm just really skimming through this because time is very short or long. And here you see the red is the port measurement, the blue is the driver output measurement, and the composite is the black. And the composite is pretty flat, and we see the response like going up a little bit, like below 100 hertz, and it increases, what's that, like down to like 60 hertz or so. So there's a little peak, and that would give like a little boost to the lower end. There's a little, not such a little, but quite a bit of a trough there, and that would make it so that you will have to toy around with the space, with the placement of these loudspeakers. So in certain positions you would feel kind of like a gap in the upper mid bass or lower upper bass, and around 170 hertz. But if you place it correctly, then with the room mode, with playing around, like how the reflection from the room gets back to you, then you can take care of that sudden trough. And that's what R. Dudley reported, that once he found the placement of these speakers, they were pretty darn good in the bass. And it's also pretty smooth up here. There's a little bit of a thing going on there, and he said that can show up as like a metallicness or edginess. Yes, I agree with that, but it's relatively minor, so I wouldn't really fret about it, and it did not bother Art either to any greater degree. So here we could go back to the step response. Nice, not exceptionally good, but anyway, I just don't want to fret more time about that, and I don't want to spend any more time on these anyway. So actually overall, so John's experience that the A4 had excellent bass. That is confirmed by looking at its bigger brother, the A7. I would suspect that the A4 has a similar character as the A7. It will not have quite as good as bass response as the A7, because here, where did we see it? We have a round port. So the port of the A4 is not as good, and the difference is because this is a cheaper model, and just sticking in a plastic tube that costs like $1 or 50 cents for the manufacturer, and creating the slot port, that requires like a much more expensive addition, because they actually had to redesign, where were we? Was it on page 2? So they had to redesign the cabinet, because for this spaceport, actually there's a cabinet element inside that goes like this. So there's an extra board, there's extra baffle, and they had to put that in, and putting that in and doing this is a much more costly process than just drilling a hole and shoving in a piece of plastic tube. But it's much better, and if you are building your loudspeaker, it's really no bother for you to build a port this way, and I would recommend to always do that and just forget about those nasty plastic pipes. They are really good when we have or like a toilet drain for that purpose, or your bathtub. It's perfect. Those things work really well. Although there you want to make it something like a brass or something sturdier material, but plastic I suppose is fine as well. But for loudspeakers, please always think about slot ports if you are going for ported designs. They are much superior, and the Spendor story tells this for us as well. So I hope everyone learned something from this, and thank you, John, for bringing this classic British loudspeaker to my attention. I've heard about Splendors, but I have not heard any. The UK is on the other side of the globe, 11 hours time difference from my time zone, and across 2 oceans, it's just impossible to get any of these here. So thank you, everyone, and have an awesome day. Bye-bye.